Have you ever witnessed a soul leaving in silence? No cries, no pleas, no final argument. Just a last glance, a cold gust of wind drifting through the room, and then emptiness. The empath, the one who once absorbed every sorrow, who carried wounds not their own, has vanished. And in that moment when silence begins to speak, the narcissist's nightmare quietly begins. This isn't merely the story of a toxic relationship. It is an ancient shifting, a sacred exodus, where a soul once imprisoned in shadow begins the journey home. Carl Jung called this rupture the shattering of the persona, the mask we wear to survive, but which also makes us forget who truly lives behind it. In a world where manipulation wears the costume of love, where emotions become tools of control, the quiet departure of the empath is no simple retreat. It is a rite, a ceremony of rebirth where one steps out of being a shadow in someone else's life and returns to the light of their own being. In American culture, we are taught to be strong, to forgive, to love unconditionally. But how many times have you mistaken compassion for permission to be harmed again and again? How often have you called your endurance love and forgot the sanctity of your own limits? You see, what we often call a snap, the breaking point of the empath, does not come like thunder from a clear sky. It is a subterranean wave, the pressure of 1,000 swallowed no's, the weight of suppressed truths behind a smile. And when the soul has had enough, it no longer seeks the mind's permission, it rises. In the next part, I'll take you deeper into the mystical psychological structure between empath and narcissist. Not as two individuals, but as two archetypes, the healer and the devourer of attention. An ancient drama reenacted again and again within the human soul. Stay with me, because when you understand the role you've been cast to play, you can begin to rewrite your own script. There is a strange truth few speak aloud. The empath is not naive. They are not simply the helpless victim in the hands of a narcissist. Quite the opposite, they are ancient souls gifted with such profound sensitivity that they once believed they could redeem another's shadow with love. And that is where the tragedy begins. When an empath enters a relationship with a narcissist, it is rarely blindness. Rather, something unconscious within them recognizes something hauntingly familiar. It is not just a person with issues. It is a mirror, a reflection of their earliest wounds. A cold father, a crying mother, a room filled with silence where feelings had to be buried just to survive. The empath sees the narcissist's pain and feels summoned. Jung once said, "The wounded healer is the one who heals others in order to forget their own wounds." And so the journey begins, not of two lovers, but of a soul ritual, one who attempts to heal the other's shadow while forgetting their own. The emotion here is not mere love. It is the seductive danger of being needed. Most empaths were once children who felt invisible, unrecognized. So when the narcissist arrives with pleading eyes and praise, like scripture, the empath believes they've finally been chosen, but it is not their true self being chosen, only the role they perform, the healer, the understander, the one who never leaves. Have you ever been there? Have you ever believed that if you were just good enough, patient enough, loving enough, they would change? And yet, day by day, every boundary you set was crossed. Every hurt you felt you forgave. You excused. You rationalized. You called it compassion. But in truth, it was fear of being abandoned again. And then slowly, you began to forget yourself. This is the moment the soul begins to fracture. As Jung described, in the process of inflation, when the ego swells through identification with moral ideals, we lose the way home. You no longer recognize your own voice. You don't know what you want. You're afraid to say no. And the cruelest part, you still call it love. But the soul, that silent witness behind the veil of consciousness, knows. It begins to send dreams, symbolic images, oceans, dark corridors, snakes' locked doors. These are not nightmares. They are messages. They are cries for help. And if you dare to listen, to sit in stillness and feel, you will begin to hear a strange sound. Your own voice. You are never here to die in someone else's darkness. You are here to remember your own light. And then one day you no longer scream. You no longer argue. You simply disappear, not as an escape, but as a resurrection. That is the snap, not an explosion, but an awakening. You reclaim the pieces of soul you gave away. You look into the mirror without flinching. You walk alone without feeling empty. You no longer seek anyone to validate your worth. And finally, you remember who you've been searching for all along yourself. Yes, guilt may still arise, sadness, loneliness. That's natural. Jung said there is no coming to consciousness without pain, but do not let pain drag you back into the dream, because now you are not walking alone. There are thousands of souls awakening with you, leaving behind the dream of manipulation and roles. They are here in this video, in the comments, in our shared space. If you see yourself in this story, don't stay silent. Comment below. What moment made you realize it was time to leave? Let us bear witness to each other's rebirth. No one should have to awaken alone. And you know what? The next chapter will take us into the true depths of shadow, where the archetype of the wounded healer meets the self-anointed saint. We will explore what happens when the empath enters their own darkness and why it's not terrifying but sacred. Walk with me. There are still sacred things waiting to be named. Have you ever felt like you were living a role, but the script wasn't yours? This is the moment the empath enters the realm of the shadow, that part of the psyche Jung described as the thing a person has no wish to be. After leaving the gravitational pull of the narcissist, the empath may expect peace, a burst of freedom like sunlight after the storm. But here's the paradox: the real storm begins after the escape. Because when there is no one left to save, no pain left to absorb, the empath finally faces the one thing they've long avoided themselves. And in that silence, they begin to hear a very old, very quiet cry, the voice of the inner child, the one who learned to survive by pleasing, the one who believed that if they were silent, obedient good love would stay. And when you dare to look into those eyes, you realize the story was never about the narcissist. It was about an ancient wound you've carried all along. The other was merely a living symbol of your fear of abandonment, your sense of unworthiness, your illusion that you must sacrifice to be loved. True healing doesn't begin when you leave someone, but when you stop leaving yourself. As Americans, we're raised in a culture that praises strength, achievement, giving. But few of us are taught that boundaries are love too, that silence is not always consent, that anger may be the soul's last cry for help. Jung once wrote, "Emotion is the chief source of all becoming. There can be no transformation of darkness into light without emotion." So if you're feeling rage, grief, even fury toward yourself, don't run. It's not a sign you failed. It's the sign you're waking up. The empath at this stage is no longer the gentle one whispering, "It's okay." They begin to confront the buried rage, the exhaustion that's been pushed aside for years, the self that was locked away to keep the peace. And in that clash between persona, the social mask, and shadow, the repressed essence, the empath experiences what Jung called the sacred fire, not to destroy, but to burn away the false roles and make space for true rebirth. But remember, to burn is not to annihilate. The ego isn't destroyed, it is transformed. You begin to discern between genuine kindness and self-erasing tolerance. You learn to love without dissolving. You begin to speak your truth even when it's inconvenient, even when it disappoints others. And from this place, you are no longer the healer. You become the one who sees clearly. If you've experienced this sacred fire, I invite you to share your moment in the comments. When did you realize that your anger wasn't a flaw, but a wake-up call? Let this community be a space where no one has to feel ashamed of their real emotions. Because when an empath awakens, it's not just one person that heals. An ancient current of energy is released. This is not just personal, it's collective. And the real question is, what happens next? Can the empath love again? Can they open without losing themselves? How do they walk in the new world after seeing such piercing truths? In the next episode, I'll take you into one of the deepest layers of this journey, where the empath is no longer the victim, no longer the savior, but becomes the creator of reality through awakened perception. We'll explore the symbol of inner union, where masculine and feminine light and shadow finally merge into one. Stay with me, because the most sacred door is just ahead. Have you ever felt a voice within, gentle yet impossible to ignore? A call from a part of you that has long been forgotten, long unloved, now whispering softly, "I am here." After walking through the darkness, the empath begins to understand that they were never meant to carry the role of another salvation. Standing at the threshold of a higher consciousness, they leave behind blind belief and step into the return to the self, the wholeness Carl Jung described as the union of the conscious and the unconscious. Here the journey no longer revolves around two people, the empath and the narcissist. Instead, it unfolds between the forces within the persona, our social mask, and the shadow, the disowned self. Beyond this threshold begins a deeper ascent, one that leads toward the anima or animus, the inner soul opposite within us, all the hidden piece that completes the alchemy of the soul. This is the sacred masterpiece of individuation. Overcoming the shadow is difficult, but meeting the anima or animus, that is the true summit. The descent begins in a stage the ancient alchemists called nigredoa, time of inner darkness, decomposition, and disorientation. The old self dissolves, leaving only a heavy fog of suppressed wounds. It is not merely sadness or anger, but the weight of years pressing inward. And yet only by sitting with that darkness instead of fleeing from it does the empath begin to glimpse the light. It is here that the illusion of the rescuer role finally begins to fade. But dissolving the persona is not enough. The shadow must be faced and embraced. Jung taught that progress is not found in denial, nor in surrender to the darker parts of the self, but in reunion. To meet the bitter, the ashamed, the hidden fragments of who you are, and whisper, "Come home." In this embrace, the empath finds freedom, not only from false roles, but also from the walls that once blocked the inner light. Through those cracks, the anima, or animus, begins to emerge like fire rising from stone, a hidden beauty finally revealed. The anima is the inner feminine in men, and the animus the inner masculine in women. They are bridges between reason and feeling, between what is known and what waits in mystery. They appear in dreams and art and visions, not to trap us in fantasy, but to help us reclaim our own perception. They remind us not to dissolve into myth, but to consciously choose how we stand in the world. Then comes Carl Jung, the sacred inner union. Here opposites merge into wholeness. It is not two halves finding each other, but two wholes coming together. Anima and animus are no longer shadows of longing, but forces of creation, inner radiance. The empath no longer walks as a rescuer, but as a soul who fully exists, complete in presence. Finally, the self emerges, the radiant center that holds both tenderness and fierceness, both shadow and light. From this place, the empath no longer reacts from old scripts. They live anchored in the soul, steady as a lighthouse amidst the storms of emotion. If you recognize yourself in these stages, whether in the darkness of Negredo, in the fragile reunion with the shadow, in the appearance of the anima or animus, or in the quiet presence of the self-pause, and ask, which stage am I in? Perhaps your dreams have already begun to whisper symbols back to you, guiding you along the way. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to be present, and in presence we walk together, we see each other, we heal together. The path ahead will lead us even deeper into the language of the unconscious dream's creativity and the subtle gestures of the soul. In learning this language, the empath will discover the map of the inner world and never again wander as a lost traveler. Stay with me, because the most sacred part of rebirth is not waiting at the destination. It lives in every step where we dare to name ourselves. Have you ever heard that quiet voice inside you? Not in moments of chaos, but in stillness, a single drop that somehow carries the weight of an entire ocean. This is the moment the empath begins to understand things that words can never truly express. After facing their shadow and integrating the anima, or animus, the empath steps into a new realm. It's not just about personal awakening anymore, it becomes about presence in action. Carl Jung called this phase the self in action, a state where the inner world no longer remains buried, but begins to move and shape our outer life. You see it in dreams and creativity, in the quiet gestures that seem small, yet burn with fierce aliveness. 1. The calling from the unconscious in the first dream. The awakened empath notices a shift. Their dreams no longer replay wounds or cycles of pain. Instead, they emerge as visions of rebirth, a child walking through fire, a serpent crowned in flames, a river so clear it mirrors the soul. To Jung, these weren't just poetic metaphors. He saw them as the soul's own syntax, the language of the unconscious. In this realm, symbols are not decorations, they're messages. When a symbol rises from a dream, it's not just emotional processing. It's a sacred conversation with something older than thought itself. 2. From longing to art, the power of creation. Now the empath begins to live from within, no longer confined to scripts written by others. They start expressing their inner world through image, movement, sound. It might look like a misty painting, a trembling poem, a fragile melody. This isn't art therapy. It's something more ancient. It's sacred expression, healing through creation. Jung once said, "To the artist, the inward world is reality. The outer world is illusion." Through creation, the empath rebuilds their inner temple, a space untouched by the outer world's demands. 3. Becoming the flame, guiding without preaching. After walking through shadow and creating from the soul, the empath becomes something new, a quiet fire. They don't lead by instructing, they guide by presence. People are drawn to them, not because they preach, but because they simply are. And here's the deeper truth. Those who find themselves near the empath don't need fixing. They need witnessing. They don't need your answers. They need your presence. In this sacred space, the empath is no longer just a healer. They become a mirror helping others see their own hidden light. 4. Symbols in motion. When the soul moves through gesture. Healing is no longer something the empath talks about. It's something they live. In how they touch their work, tend their plants, look at others without trying to change them. This is what Jung meant when he said the self not only reveals itself, it reveals reality. When you live from the soul, even your smallest actions can help others remember who they truly are. 5. The flow continues. Soul to soul transmission. By now, the empath has walked away from old patterns, from codependent bonds, from the unintegrated shadow, from seeking external validation. They've become whole within themselves. But the world isn't always ready for that kind of wholeness. And so the empath makes a radical choice to stay, to remain present, not to escape, but to live fully in the world as it is. And that presence, quiet and unassuming, becomes a revolution. Here's a question. Have you ever stopped trying to get approval and instead simply witnessed someone's truth? In that moment, you opened a door for them. If you've ever offered someone the space to feel enough without words, just through presence, share that moment below. Tell us. Let us remember that healing doesn't always require answers. Sometimes it just takes presence. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the awakened empath returns to the world not as a savior, but as someone who chooses love over control, who draws boundaries not from fear, but from clarity. Stay close, because the symbolic path never really ends. This isn't just about personal healing anymore. It's about something collective, something sacred, a return to the truth of the soul. And that story is still unfolding. Do you know that feeling when the silence inside you finally begins? Like the last breath before the moment of rebirth. When the empath has walked through the shadows, embraced their anima and animus, and allowed the true self to shine through their actions, something changes in their relationships. It is no longer about not saving others. It becomes about connecting from the deepest place within, yet with boundaries wide enough to honor both souls. This is the quiet prelude to emotional maturity, where boundaries are no longer walls of fear, but doors that open to authenticity. 1. Embracing difference, loving without denial. The awakened empath knows that love does not mean dissolving into another. On the contrary, love means seeing the differences and still choosing to stay. Many people often unconsciously search for someone to regulate their chaos rather than truly unite. But when you live from the self, you choose to be present, calm, steady, and without the need to change anyone. This is the inner struggle between the old compulsion to rescue and the new ability to simply witness without fixing. It is a quiet state untouched by demands or roles, carried by the understanding that true love does not need permission. 2. The limits of love, boundaries without fear. The awakened empath understands that exhaustion doesn't come from loving deeply, but from loving beyond the soul's natural limits. Boundaries are not fences built from fear. They are luminous, flexible, necessary borders that protect where love truly belongs. In Jungian psychology, boundaries are the mark of a mature soul, not the hero saving the world, but the human who knows who they are. When you say no without guilt, you redraw the map of your inner life. You declare to the world that you exist whole, not as someone else's source of energy. 3. Choosing to comfort, not rescue, patience with your own soul and with others. The awakened empath no longer feels pressured to save others from themselves. Instead, they choose to offer comfort, not telling someone how they should be, but standing firmly enough for others to feel they are not abandoned. This is healing that doesn't happen through endless arguments or emotional overextension, but through the silent presence of someone grounded. Healing happens through the calmness that refuses to be pulled into chaos, through a heart steady enough to remain soft yet unshaken. 4. Freedom in silence, not loneliness, but sovereignty. The awakened empath no longer fears silence. In a world that worships busyness, silence from the self is a radical act. It is not an anchor that drags them down, but a mast that steadies them through the storm. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is the space where truth arises. It is the soil where the roots of the soul reach deep. And the empath moves through life not as someone isolated, but as a great tree, a presence where others can rest, not to climb upon, but to breathe alongside. 5. Beyond relationships. Becoming a living symbol. The empath's transformation does not end with intimate relationships. They become a living symbol through the way they walk in the world. A glance, a word, a small gesture, all can carry the healing energy that someone desperately needs. Not a blinding light, but a soft glow that reveals the path ahead. In these moments, the empath is no longer the healer. They become something more subtle, more enduring, a reminder that another way of being is possible, one that permeates the world without breaking it. To you listening now, have you ever chosen silence for yourself, a moment of saying nothing that still felt like relief, or perhaps whispered, "Be as chaotic as you need, just don't leave me"? Share it below. Because sometimes a quiet sentence is all it takes for someone else to know they are not alone. Opening toward what comes next. In the final chapter, another door opens. We will step beyond personal growth into the way the awakened empath transforms the entire collective psyche. If you've ever wondered, can the awakening of one soul spark the awakening of a whole community? The last part will be your answer, both symbolically and tangibly. Thank you for staying with me until this moment. The path has never been about merely passing through life. It has always been about the courage to return fully deeply to your own soul. Have you ever felt a spiritual energy flowing beyond yourself, spreading gently like a single note that lingers in a space larger than you? When an empath walks the path of awakening, when they have faced the darkness, embraced the shadow, integrated both anima and animus, and begun to live from the self, they are not simply reborn as an individual. They become a living symbol, a guiding light on the collective map of humanity. This is what Jung described: an enlightened individual not only heals themselves, but in an invisible yet powerful way, gives the community the strength to awaken from its collective dream, offering others a foundation to realize they too are not lost. Jung believed that we do not exist in an isolated bubble. On the contrary, we share a common spiritual foundation, the collective unconscious, a reservoir of archetypal images and shared memories of humankind. When an empath awakens, they do not merely step out of a personal role, they bring back to life an ancient symbol within the shared unconscious. An awakened empath often becomes a symbol, much like an image appearing in a collective dream. They live in a language that seems deeply personal, yet it resonates across the shared emotional field. Because archetypes, the hero, the shadow, the outsider, are not just personal journeys. They are streams of energy moving through many souls at once. Individuation. The Jungian process of becoming whole is often misunderstood as a lonely retreat from the world, but in truth it is not so. Jung emphasized that when a person becomes whole, they also gain a deeper sense of social responsibility and compassion for their community. The awakened empath does not abandon society. They return to it with a fuller heart, with deeper awareness, walking alongside others in authenticity and love. The collective unconscious does not live only within the individual. It reveals itself in culture, in shared dreams, in the myths passed down through generations. When an empath begins to live from the self, they seem to revive an ancient melody echoing through the collective soul. Every authentic action becomes a symbolic vibration within that field, one that may awaken someone who has been asleep in the collective dream. The empath awakens not only through words, but through presence. Jung reminded us that the language of the unconscious is wordless. It is found in images, gestures, symbols, and sacred moments. When the awakened one acts from the heart without needing validation or recognition, this self in action resonates with the collective unconscious, becoming a silent but powerful force of healing. And now I invite you into this connection. If you have ever been awakened by a simple glance, a small gesture, or a moment of pure presence from someone in your community, share it below. Perhaps it was the instant you realized you were not alone, or the moment you thought your awakening is also awakening me. Because we are not only those waiting to be healed, we are those who awaken together. In the conclusion, we will not only speak of the personal journey or the collective journey, but of how the awakened empath can become a seed for a new spiritual civilization, one where symbols are lived, where silence holds the power of liberation. Can the awakening of a single person stir the awakening of an entire generation? The answer is waiting just ahead. Thank you for staying until the end. This path has never been only about the individual. It has always been about the shared light, the light that has awakened and that now lives within all of us. Do you feel it in the final silence of your soul? A new breath rising, soft yet powerful, like the very first drop of rain after a long storm whispering, "I have returned." The journey we have just walked together from personal darkness into wholeness of presence is not merely a personal story. It is a symbol of rebirth carrying a sacred blessing for those who are still wandering in the night. As Jung once said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. And here where the spiritual is no longer repression but living energy, all of us have awakened together. Perhaps you don't yet dare to call your pain beautiful. But look closely, it is the very abyss from which your light has risen. It is the shattered pieces of the old that have now opened a gateway into the self. The empath does not merely survive their wounds, they become the ancient continuation of a light rekindled in life itself. If a drop of water can merge with the ocean, then you yourself have become that ocean for someone else. When you step into a space, the energy you carry silent, unburdened, without demand can touch the hidden scars of another soul beside you. You do not need to declare I am awakened. Your very presence is enough, and in that presence you give others the permission to see themselves, and in doing so to return to themselves. So in this very moment, if you feel a stirring within you, if your awakening has not yet fully blossomed, leave a simple comment. This is where I am, or I see the light within me. Don't worry about perfect words. All that matters is presence, because here we are not alone. Here we walk together. And if this video has awakened in you the need to look inward, then click subscribe, not for numbers, but so that we may meet again in the videos to come where we will once more call the soul by its true name. For the key does not lie in knowledge. It lies in the inner song you dare to let rise for the first time. And in the corridors of our shared unconscious, every time someone dares to strike a spark, the light spreads one step further. Thank you for not leaving. Thank you for your light. And I look forward to the times we will meet again, like drops knocking at the door of silence, so that together we may once more hear I have returned. And I am not alone.